Everyone, are you able to hear me? See the screen? Can you please give me some updates here? Good evening, everyone. So if you can give me a couple of updates, good evening. Okay, yeah. So all of you can see the screen and hear me, isn't it? All right, Yukta, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. So let's get started. Now, a quick brief regarding parajumbles, right? So we are talking about parajumbles, a question type that has been there. If you take the history of CAT, this has been there throughout the history of CAT. In fact, it's not a question that is exclusive to CAT. I'm sure all of you know that when it comes to other exams, other aptitude exams, parajumbles is an integral component, right? The only difference is that currently CAT gives you parajumbles without options, and the other exams, other management and entrance exams, give you parajumbles with options. All right. And it makes a world of difference when you have options to choose from. Okay. So now, first things first, what is a parajumble question? Okay. What is the expectation? Look at the given given instruction. Now, this is so as I was telling you, it's important for us to understand the instruction and the skill set that's being tested with this question type. All right. Now, the instruction given in CAT is always like this. It says, particularly in the last several years, I think since 2018, it's been 4 sentences without options. All right. And the instructions say that the 4 sentences given in this question, when properly sequenced, form a coherent paragraph. Each sentence is labeled with a number. Decide on the proper sequence of order of the sentences and key in this sequence of 4 numbers as your answer. So basically, it's a theta type question, meaning type in the answer. There are no options given. So you will have to type in the correct order of the numbers, right? The sentence numbers as they're given here will have to be correctly typed in. Now, so when you look at the instruction, you get the feeling that this is just a set of sentences of a paragraph that are picked up and presented, right? That's the idea that you get. However, it's more like, so what is the skill set that it's testing? It is testing your problem solving skills. So I was telling there are a few things that we will have to look at. And some of these things that we need to keep in mind is in a parajumble, look for the starter, all right? So when you have a set of sentences, it's important that I try to find a starter. Maybe I can distinguish the starting sentence from the other sentences, right? So the other sentences, we could figure them as followers, all right? Following sentence, a sentence that comes later. Why is it important for me to look for a starter? A starter is always that broad opening. Always think general to specific whenever you have a set of sentences. The more general and broad and an opening topic opener a sentence is, it is likely to be the starter. Comparatively, which one is the most broad one? All right. So look for that starter because that gives you a start. Okay. Now, is it just that we look at starters and followers? No, there are many other things that you can consider. Look at linking, okay, links being created. Now, how do you create links? There are multiple ways, several things that we look for when we try to create links. Some of these things are, maybe I look for pairing sentences in terms of maybe simple grammatical or technical things like noun, pronoun. You know that a pronoun is always something that comes later, correct? A sentence that uses a pronoun to refer to the noun comes later. The sentence with the noun always comes first, correct? Unless there are, exceptional cases, this is the general rule. There are transitional words and phrases that take ideas ahead, transitional words and phrases, right? We also try to look at these. Now, this is very, very important to create those mandatory pairs. What are these transitional words and phrases? You may have words that contradict previous ideas. You may have words that simply continue or elaborate or substantiate by giving examples, etc., to the previous idea. So there's an idea, and that's taken ahead in terms of, let's say, evidence given, examples given, etc. All right. So they might sometimes just give you a structure. There can be transitional words like then, afterward, firstly, secondly, etc., which are just creating a structure. Now, obviously, at cat level parajumbles, you may not find such words that denote simple structure, as in, firstly, somebody did this, secondly, someone did that, etc. Right? So we can think of, this is something, it's not going to be so visible or easy. But transitional words and phrases are extremely important. Recognizing them become very important for us to create these pairs, right? And what are these pairs that we are talking of? Mandatory pairs. What are mandatory pairs? You know very clearly that two sentences are linked. Why are they linked? For instance, now with or without these transitional words or phrases, sometimes you may have words connecting. For example, a word of contrast, but, however, etc. In the meanwhile, right? A transitional phrase like in the meanwhile, or moreover, besides, in addition, for instance, for example. These are all transitional words and phrases. Sometimes you may have them, sometimes you just don't have them, correct? Nevertheless, I am expected to pay attention. Elaboration, okay, can be an elaboration of that, can be just an explanation of that, correct? An explanation, a continuation, therefore. It can be an example for that idea, some evidence for that idea, right? So you see how that pairing is happening. There is an idea, and then I find support for that idea. So there is a sentence that's providing explanation. Sometimes even a sentence that says, in other words, right? It is rephrasing, presenting that same idea in other words, continuing, presenting examples or evidence that can form a pair. You may have an idea which is followed by, say, a word of contrast, right? I know that there is contrast or contradiction, correct? Sometimes you know that there are these words like but, yet, however, nonetheless, nevertheless, on the other hand, etc., which are very distinctly establishing contrast. So I have an idea, and then I have another sentence that is trying to contradict that, right? Contrast or contradiction, either of these things. They mean the same, basically. But sometimes some words can also establish concession. What does that mean? A concession is when you use words like although, right? In spite of, still, yet, but, no, not but, despite that, etc. Right? Now, these are words that are into even though, okay? Even if, even though, they're introducing a concession. They're saying that in most cases, this is true. So although it was raining, he reached the place on time. Meaning, generally, when it rains, people don't reach places on time. But in this case, he happened to reach the place on time, correct? So you are showing that this is a concession to the general rule, all right? So all these things can help you make connections. There are also sometimes ideas followed by, let's say, an inference that you're drawing, a conclusion as a result, then, thus, hence, correct? So you have to recognize what idea or set of sentences is this drawing from, correct? So it can be an inference. Even a word like maybe a next sentence says, then, okay? Not in terms of continuing an action. So the first sentence says, maybe presents a general idea about something. And the next sentence tries to conclude from with that. If that is the definition, then we see its application in this scenario, right? So that is an inference being drawn or a conclusion, correct? So in all these ways, you find that pairing happens, mandatory pairs happen, okay? Along with noun-pronoun link, you may also look for, simple things like even an article link, right? So a sentence that has a noun which uses, which uses the definite article should necessarily be placed after a sentence that uses the same noun with an indefinite article like a and an, right? The plus noun should come later, a or an plus noun should come first, right? But these are less visible links. Noun pronoun link is a very strong one. Transitional word link is a very strong one, but article linkage, etc., less visible in cat parajumbles because they are quite complex. All right. Now, Yeah, we're getting there, Simran. Okay. Yes, we're getting there. So generally, we're going to keep all these ideas in mind, and we're going to solve some questions. Okay. Let's also find the kind of trickiness that CAT presents. Even if there are just 4 sentences, there can always be a sentence that I don't know where to place it, correct? Such things can happen. So let's look at this. This is a question that I've taken from CAT 2018 slot 2. I've largely presented 4 sentence parajumbles because that is the norm these days. But I think towards the end, I've also included a 5 sentence parajumble from CAT 2017. All right. Now, can I give you people a minute here to look at this? Please take a look at this question. So we're going to discuss the identifying the starting sentence and all of that. One of you had, yes, posted that query, isn't it? A minute for all of you to read this. You can post your answers if you see something here, if you get a link, a sequence. Even if you find a mandatory pair or just a link, that's also okay. Okay, anyone with the answers? All right, Simran. Okay. 2341. And then there is 4231, 2341. All right. You close. You've identified one link, but probably not everything. Okay. I think the ones who've identified the 2-3 link are absolutely right. 2-3 is definitely a link, right? Now, when I see the first sentence, there is a thus here. So the first thing that I'm going to think of here is that this is a conclusion sentence. We're talking of self-management, and we are kind of inferring that self-management, therefore, is how the individual manages the symptoms of any disease or chronic condition, correct? How an individual manages himself, self. So I think of this as something that should come later. Now, when I look at 2, it says that people who have such progressive diseases prefer to have control over their own lives. Control, and that's a keyword. I find that same keyword in the next sentence. Having control means, among other things, that patients themselves perform self-management activities. So you see that 2-3 is a very clear link because 2 is talking about how people with progressive diseases want to have control over their own lives. And what is the control that we're talking about? They self-manage, they manage themselves. Okay. Now, what is 4 talking about? 4, unless we read very carefully, 4 is introducing a slightly different idea. It says that we need to support such people who are trying to do self-management, and that is called self-management support. Who's giving the support? Not the individuals. Obviously, the outside, the other people, the ones who are, around that individual. This is the outside support that I'm talking about, which means it's a slightly different term from self-management. I clearly find that 2, 3, and then 1. Okay. From 2, 3, the idea of control, having control over your own lives, you figure that we are talking of self-management. Thus, what is self-management? It is how an individual controls his own, manages his own life and his issues. Correct? Where do I place 4? 4 will have to come at the end, not break this sequence of 2, 3, 1, because 2, 3, 1 focuses on the individual's ability to manage himself. 4 talks about the support that others can give, which means it has to be 2, 3, 1, 4, right? 2, 3, 1, 4. So you see, it's a very small trickiness here, isn't it? A very small trickiness. What is that? There is a sentence that looks like an apparent conclusion because of the word thus. And I'm tempted to think of it as the last one. I can see that amongst most of the ones who posted the answer, one has appeared at the end. Okay, but that's where I need to read very clearly. It's important for me that I pay close attention to the details of the sentences. For example, when we read RC, we might read quickly, skim through some details or supporting points, because it's important for me to get the big picture. I need to know what every paragraph is largely saying, the important point of every paragraph, and then move on, correct? And get the main point and the primary purpose of the author. But here, if I miss those details, then I miss the connections. Okay. All it needs for us is to miss reading the details and seeing the difference between self-management and self-management support. Okay. And therefore, I end up placing 1 at the end. And that's enough for me to get this wrong. Correct. One sentence placed incorrectly, the whole sequence is incorrect. Right. I hope this is clear. You can post any questions or queries that you have. We're looking at the next question now, okay? So clearly there was a mandatory pair in the previous one, which was that 2, 3, all right? And around 2, 3, I look at sequencing. So recognizing mandatory pairs, recognizing what might be the start of the sentence, end of the sequence, etc. These are things that really help us. So this is one taken from CAT 2021 slot 3. I'll give you a while to read. The sentences are wrong, pretty long. So I'm going to give you at least more than a minute and a half for this. You might find 2 really strong pairs, or at least 1 pair. Maybe not 2 strong pairs, as I said, but 1 pair for sure. Can you let me know what that pair is in this second question? Okay, that's nice. Simran, Ritz. I think 1, 4 being a pair should be quite visible, isn't it? What is the connection between 1 and 4? Let me know if you want some more time to read, okay? If you want some more time to read, you have to. Yeah, okay. Many of you are marking, sharing the answers. I'll just wait for another 30 seconds. Good. Good. I expected many of you to go wrong here. Somehow I thought that you would find these sentences difficult to place. That's nice. Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. Right. So I think all of us can see that 4-1 is a pair, correct? How does 4-1 become a pair? When I read 1, I figure that returning of artifacts, even if I don't understand the word restitution, I think when you come across something that says original cultures, restituting artifacts or man-made objects to original cultures, the idea of returning where they were taken from comes in, correct? Even otherwise, later on, some taking steps to return artifacts is mentioned. So I can figure out what restitution means. Now we are talking in this sentence of how returning artifacts to the original cultures can bring about legal troubles, because Western museums have this legal prohibition. They are not allowed to return or, dispose of, get rid of their collections. And I've read the fourth sentence too, correct? I'm assuming that as you read each sentence, you have that thought processor. You're identifying whether it's a starter or a follower. So by the time I read the fourth sentence, I figure that the legal discussion only happens in 4 again, right? 1-4 is a pair. Legal hurdles notwithstanding, right? Despite, notwithstanding means despite that, in spite of that. So in spite of the legal hurdles, politicians and institutions would now like to defuse, right? Make sure that those bombs are not, going to blast, but defuse them. They're now backing the return of whatever they hold. So France, Germany, all these European countries, we understand were the past colonial rulers. So 1-4 clear. Now, between 3. So 3 maybe I recognize as a possible starter, but I'm still not very sure, because 3 says that museums are in Europe today are struggling to come to terms with their colonial legacy. 1 also looks like it's opening the topic, that it's introducing the subject of returning artifacts. 3 also looks like a possible starter. Now, how do we decide here? Okay, how do we decide that 3 should be the starter and 1 is something that comes later? Okay, I'm still not decided on 2, correct? 2 is referring to a specific demand by Nigeria. Nigeria is demanding that European museums return their artifacts, which they had taken during the colonial rule of Nigeria. Now, the decision between 3 and 1 can happen if you're able to see that 3 is talking of something, a happening, or how museums are trying to deal with the demands on them to return their the things that they hold, and 1 is talking of the consequence of it. Unless museums return these artifacts, the question of having to face legal obstacles doesn't come in, correct? So you're talking of something on the lines of a cause or a happening that can lead to a consequence or an effect. The discussion, the whole idea of having to face legal obstacles can only come in if and when they return their artifacts, correct? And who faces the legal obstacles? It's the museums. So I have to talk of 3 first, correct? 3 is the event where you find that you have museums trying to deal with the tradition of the colonial rulers that they've inherited, their inheritance from the colonial times. They're trying to deal with it because some are forced to return artifacts. Now, when I figure that this is the happening that has brought in the context or discussion of facing legal obstacles, I realize that 2 is actually connected with 3 and not connected with 1 and 4, right? In fact, 1 and 4, if you look at placing 2 at the end, what might this in 2 refer to? What is this? This is in response to countries like Nigeria. What is this? This, if it's placed after 2-4, it can end up referring to The legal prohibition that Western museums face. Legal prohibitions are not in response to countries like Nigeria forcing European museums to return, correct? So 3214. 3 introduces the challenge that museums are facing, how they are returning the artifacts, especially in the current context where countries like Nigeria are pressurizing those. So this is an instance. It explains the struggle that they are facing. And 1 and 4 talk about how they might have to face legal hurdles. Despite that, despite the legal hurdles existing, there are a lot of statesmen, politicians, institutions that are actually backing this return. Correct? Can be a little challenging, but I'm really pleasantly surprised to see that all of you got this right. Okay, let's look at another one. This is from CAT 2018 slot 1. Okay, short sentences, it can be a very tempting one. Okay, you might in fact not get into the previous question because it has long sentences. When you find short sentences, it looks like, okay, I can finish this very soon. It must be an easy question. I'm going to attempt this. You'll find a pair here as well. All right, Simran. All right, Hridayam, Yukta. Okay. Right. What is the mandatory pair here? Okay. Now, when I see a but, right, I'm assuming all of you found enough time to read this. When I come across a but, I know that this cannot be my starter. It will have to appear later. In fact, it has to appear after a sentence that it's contradicting. Correct? So I'll be on the lookout for what sentence or what idea is this contradicting. But now we have another group, and this another group is described as the unwitting enablers. Unwitting. They're enabling something without knowing, without deliberately or consciously knowing this, correct? They seem to be acting like the enablers. Who's an enabler? Someone who, gives the strength or empowers somebody to do something, right? When I read the second sentence, I find that we're talking of democracy and high levels of inequality are incompatible. Now, what do you mean by incompatible? They just don't agree. You can see that democracy is one that gives political equality, legal equality, if nothing else, right? Definitely, in a democracy, everybody is regarded, everyone has equal voting rights, everyone is regarded equal in the eyes of law. Correct? So it's about equality. But there are high levels of inequality too, all right, particularly in the US currently, and they don't agree with each other. They are inconsistent. They don't, match each other. The third sentence talks of believing these people. The only people or doers that we have mentioned so far is in the first sentence. Believing these people are working for a better world, they are actually making slight course corrections, etc. But they're ensuring that the system goes on as it is uninterrupted. I might have thought of the second one as a start, but when I read three, I very clearly see that 1, 3 should be a pair. Why should 1, 3 be a pair? Because these people, the unwitting enablers, what they do is explained in 3. What do? They think that that's why they're unwittingly, unconsciously, they are enabling the current system to go on. What might be the current system that, without they're trying to create a better world, but the current system is just, reinforced. 2 says that maybe 2 should be my start, and 1 and 3 explains that perhaps. Now, what does 4 talk about? Very rich people will always use money to maintain their political and economic power. If democracy tries to equalize and create equality, but you're saying there is still high levels of inequality in the US, and that high level of inequality doesn't gel properly, doesn't agree properly with democracy, then it is probably because there are people working to, maintain that inequality. There must be people working to maintain that inequality, correct? And that's what 4 says. Very rich people will always use money to maintain their political and economic power. So why does what kind of inequality are we talking about? The inequality that powerful and rich people try to create. They even try to bring in political inequality. Democracy assures political equality, but they try to, sustain this inequality because they have their money with them. Using their money, they will just try to maintain their position. Will that fit at the end? 1, 3 ke baad, after I talk of enablers who are unconsciously maintaining this current system as it is, can I bring in 4? It makes absolutely no sense, isn't it? Right? In fact, it explains 2. So 2, 4 should be a link. They may not be a very visible link, but you see that 4 is actually giving you reasons as to why democracy and high levels of inequality don't go hand in hand. Because the rich people will never allow democracy and equality to prevail, because they will work on establishing and reinforcing their own inequality, right? And 1, 3 is a clear pair. That should come later, because but that other group, there is already one group, okay? And that is another reason why the reference to very rich people should come before we mention the other group, correct? Very rich people do this, but there's yet another group now who are unwittingly continuing with this, right? So 2, 4, 1, 3, right? Good to see that quite a few of you got this right. But for the ones who did not get this right, I hope this is understood. Let's look at the next. Okay, I think I should, probably hide the slot from where it is taken. Either there is recall value, right? Is there any recall value, or are we looking at some assistance? I hope not. Okay. Yeah. So for some time, you might have already seen this, but this is a nice one, interesting one. Nice, Kushi. Okay. Yeah. I'm talking of the assistance of AI or whatever, right? You will find a pair here as well. Okay. So one of these, unspoken ideas of text organization tells us that an idea is placed first and an example is placed next, correct? Idea first, exam next. So you start with examples, Ritz, isn't it? Is that what you're saying? It's difficult. Yeah, it's difficult if this is what you're used to. See, once again, all of us are starting with the example. What is the example sentence? Examples are narrowing down specific, right? Think of extremely broad openings, okay? Openings should be broad. So one thing that I'm going to add to what Ritz is saying, right? Ritz has this query. I just remembered that, you should probably consider this idea that logical presentations of ideas, see, narrative styles are okay. You can use any sort of writing style per se. But normally, logic may, you say that a general to specific deductive presentation, general to specific arrangement is always a better one. What is that general to specific? So you have this broad idea, and then you're maybe applying that idea to specific scenarios or specific situations with examples. So you're now narrowing down. You're probably explaining it with reference to specific scenarios. That's considered a very a deductive arrangement. All right. Yes, Simran, we can do that. Yeah, we have a series of lectures set up. Okay, we will definitely get into all that. I plan to take up odd man sentence next, that question type next. Okay. So coming back to Ritz's query, think that a deductive arrangement is a far better one. Presenting, see, inductive is considered to be slightly, especially when you're presenting text, inductive logic is said to be slightly faulty. What is inductive thought process? You start with examples. Let's say you talk of a few examples. But the few examples, for example, just saying considering what Twitter is saying, on the basis of how Twitter gives you this kind of instruction and says that, based on the tweets that are likely to come up, and then it says there are much more things. On the basis of this instruction, can I generalize about all such social media? Can I generalize about all internet happenings? No, isn't it? Right? So understand that, an example or a few examples or a few specific references cannot be used to generalize and conclude a principle. Nevertheless, you might find such writing styles. Okay. So in writing, some people might, create a context, present an example, a scenario where something is being discussed, and then go on to, highlight what exactly is the point being made there. Okay. But in parajumbles, since we are also being tested on logic, reasoning, how can we analyze and logically arrange sentences? Think that the idea should always come first and the example comes later. Always. All right. Consider the idea first and the example later. Never would you want to present example first and idea later. Unless, as I said, there are some continuities, there is a context creator. But in a 4-sentence parajumble, it is unlikely that we have a sentence or 1 or 2 sentences simply creating a context and then the key point is given. Okay, because you need a lot of space and words and sentences to say that. All right. I hope that idea is clear, Ritz, and some others too. I hope this makes sense to you. So therefore, what I realize is 3 can definitely not start. Okay, because 3 is giving me a specific example. It is talking about how Twitter gives me this instruction and says this is what will come into my feed. Okay, Twitter or the former X, right? But then I find a strong link between 3 and 2. What is the link? Both of them are talking about the much more thing, much more, right? So Twitter says that there is much more as to how the feeds will come into your account, what you will see. And two says that, such things encourage us into bubbles of people because, it's a bubble that I'm living in. It doesn't bring up other perspectives to me. And more than that, the question of transparency comes in these words and much more. There is something that I'm not clear about. They don't clarify that much more, correct? So 3, 2 is a clear pair, all right? Now, do I want to start with 3? No, because the rule says that I cannot start with an example. Okay, which means the idea in sentence 1, which is a very broad opening sentence, impartiality and objectivity are extremely difficult concepts. Fiend, a fiend is an what devil like thing, right? Devil, a person who is devilish, etc. However, when it's used in places like this, it simply means it's an extremely complicated, very difficult to understand concept, fiendishly difficult, right? So impartiality and objectivity are not transparent. They can cause all sorts of injustices even if transparently implemented. All right. Transparently implemented. Twitter claims to be transparent about what it brings into your feed, what the algorithm shows you. However, it hides its transparency behind and much more. Correct? So 132 is clear to me. Where do I place 4? Okay, 4, you can see when you read this, it is extending the idea of lack of transparency with phrases like this. We're only told some basic principles. That's what Twitter says at the start. We can't see the algorithm itself. So under this and much more, there can be so much that is unsaid, right? We can't see the algorithm. We cannot analyze the system sensibly. So we don't know how, what kind of perspectives, what kind of feeds, what kind of stuff we are being fed, correct? So 4 is only extending the lack of transparency. So you see 3, 2, and 4 are actually explaining 1. 1 is the general statement. So wherever you're stuck with openings, right? Opening sentence, look for the most general introduction. Which sentence introduces the idea broadly, generally, correct? You see that the broadest one is 1, correct? And therefore 1, 3, 2, 4, right? Yes. Okay, fine. And this was, by the way, a CAT 2018 slot 1 question. Okay, right. Let's look at the next one. So keep posting your queries. All right. Yeah, that'll be great. Queries and comments too. Okay. Yeah. I should have written this. Not as of today, Deepak, but I will. Okay, I will. And I will post it on all the groups. Okay. There's something that's very fundamental logic that you'll find here in this question. Very fundamental logic, isn't it? Question first, answers next. Okay. A couple of you are getting this right. That's wonderful. So I'm going to keep this thought in mind that if at all there is a question, the question should appear first and then the answer to that question. Okay. So as I read the first sentence, I find that it's talking of what precisely are the unusual elements that make a particular case so attractive to a certain kind of audience. What are those unusual elements because of which a case, right? I don't even know what the case is that we're talking of. Only later I figure that we're talking of criminal cases. But particular cases are so attractive to audiences, unusual elements. When I read the next one, the unusual part of a case might be, the unusual elements might be particularly savage case, unfathomable level of depravity. Depravity is when there is absolutely no morality, right? All morals are lost. Such savagery, such cruelty, right? A crime that is very violent and cruel. That's what you mean by unfathomable. You just cannot understand that level of moral depravity, moral lack of morality. Very often it has to do with the precise amount of mystery involved. So what are those unusual elements that make certain cases, especially cases of mystery, very attractive to some people? Why do people, follow those up? These are those elements. You can see that these are the elements. So clearly, I find that the question in one is answered by two, right? Isn't that a pair? 1, 2 is a pair. Now, if 1, 2 is a pair, what is 3 doing? 3 is also the answer part, because 3 is also saying unsolved and perhaps unsolvable cases offer something that ordinary murder doesn't. It also should come with the answer part, right? So I'm just going to keep it here for the time being. Fourth is another question. Why are some crimes destined for perpetual re-examination? There are some crime cases that are reopened. People come back to it. And there are some cases that you just forget. They are closed, maybe they are decided or not decided, but they are put into obscurity, permanent obscurity hidden out of our sight, not seen. Now, this is also a question. I cannot have the question placed after the answers are given. Questions should come first. That's basic logic, correct? So where do I place it? Now I need to decide between questions 1 and 4, which one comes first, which one comes next, correct? Because both are questions. Now that I find is helped by this pairing. I know clearly the answer to the unusual elements is given in 2, which means I have to put 1 and 2 together, correct? Now, since I cannot break 1 and 2, I end up placing 4 at the start as the question. As it is, it's a slightly broad one. You can see that. When you compare 1 and 4, you realize that 4 is presenting the idea in a very broad way. It's asking the question about crimes. Why do some crimes continue fascinating people and some crimes are just forgotten? What is it about some of these crimes? What are those elements that make them attractive? Correct? So 1 as a question is a narrower question. It is more specific than 4. 4 is a broader question, right? Luckily, that thought process is reinforced with this, right? It is supported by this pair. I can't break this pair up. So 4 at the start, first you come with this question, 1 and 2 comes later. So 1 as a question should come later. 3 is part of the answer, right? I cannot talk of 1, 3, 2. Why can't I talk of 1, 3, 2? Let me answer the question. The question is a specific one. What are the unusual elements? And I find the elements are mentioned in 2. So 3 is simply kind of, summarizing. I can't really call it a summary per se, but it is making a general statement about there are certain cases that cannot be solved, challenging with all such elements. They are not ordinary. They are very different. They offer more mystery. They offer more intrigue, etc. Correct? Therefore, 3 can be placed at the end. All right. So 4, 1, 2, 3. Quite a few of you got this right. Wonderful, that is. All right, yeah. I hope this is clear. Let's look at the next question. So simple logic, that you bring in things like question first, and then comes the answer to it, etc. That these things help you. Take a look at this. Good, you people are getting better at recognizing starters. Chronology will definitely help you here. Recognizing the flow of the timeline, right? The development of the timeline. Is there a timeline? Yes. There are phrases that refer to the progression of time. Okay. Okay, I'm going to help you here. Maybe give you a few clues. If you're going to highlight some of these things, ever since the dawn of civilization, correct? So I can see that your start is absolutely right, correct? An early timeline. And then there is a reference to these dangers. What are these dangers? What are these dangers? And why were they soon recognized? If the dangers are referring to poisons that man has used for assassination purposes since the dawn of civilization, then why are you saying they were soon recognized and they resulted in two international treaties or declarations? That said, you can't use poisoned weapons. Correct? Now think on that. So you may be right in saying one starts. But if you're going to follow that up with two, then these dangers refer to use of poison for assassination since the dawn of civilization. If that is so, why was it soon recognized and when was it recognized? In 1899 and in 1874, 19th century. Why would you say it was soon recognized and resulted in two international declarations? What does 3 say? 3 talks about the foundation of microbiology, which offered new prospects, new ideas for people to use biological weapons because it allowed, agents to be chosen. You could design specific things. You could pick specific weapons, create them, and how you wanted to use them. So microbiology offered new prospects. Is that the danger that we're talking about? Now you can clearly see 2 and 4 are a link, correct? 2 and 4 are a link because 2 talks about signing these declarations that prohibited the use of poisoned weapons. And 4 is saying that though these trade treaties were all well created, they actually failed because they did not have any means of control, correct? They failed. So clearly 2-4 is a pair, right? Undoubtedly. And we may also all agree that one should start because chronology wise too, we're talking of the dawn of civilization there. The whole problem is with the placement of 3. That is where you'll need to be very clear with what are these dangers? What was soon recognized? The dangers are these new prospects, right? So there were these new prospects that microbiology introduced, which was soon seen to be dangerous. And that's where the international declarations came in, right? But the declarations failed. Okay. So clearly 1, 3, 2, 4. This is the trick part here, isn't it? You may find one clear link here. You may even find an opening, but you have to look at what is it that prompted this decision. 2 is talking about a decision, and it also seems to present a sense of urgency. These dangers were soon recognized, right? When was microbiology founded? When did this entire, offering new prospects come into the world? We don't know, not clearly mentioned, but we do know it's part of the modern world, right? We do know that it's not part of the medieval world, etc. It's part of the modern world, right? So that sense of urgency, because it allowed for biological weapons, is what 2 is creating. And that's why you had these treaties signed, but the treaties failed, right? I hope that is clear. Okay, by the way, this was a CAT 2020 slot 1 question. All right. I hope we're clear. Okay, next. So noun, pronoun links, this, that, these, those, they're all noun, pronoun links, isn't it? Wherever you have a this or a that or a these and those are plural references, correct? This and that are singular references. So what are they referring to? All right, they must be referring to something. Pay attention to that. Make sure you connect them well. These dangers, what were those dangers in the previous one? Look at this. Remember, these questions need to be solved in less than 1.5 minutes. So ideally, we practice solving it all in less time. This is tricky. I won't call this easy. Do we have the answers coming in? You can even let me know if there is some pairing you found. I can see that some of you are struggling. It's not easy, right? But I'm glad that at least all of you recognize the starter. That's easy to identify, correct? Okay, so when I read the first sentence, it seems to be, having comparing, creating an analogy, comparing an idea with something. Okay, what is it talking about? Like the ants that make up a colony, individual ants together, they make the colony of ants. Likewise, no single neuron holds information like self-awareness, hope, or pride. So one single neuron doesn't make the whole set of complex information that our brains have. One single neuron in the brain, one cell, one nerve cell, a nerve ending, etc. Okay. And that is just like how one ant cannot make a colony. Two is talking about how the human brain is not yet understood enough. So I don't have enough understanding of the brain to identify the mechanism by which emergence functions. When I look at this word emergence, I feel, why are we saying that we cannot identify the mechanism by which emergence functions? And it's a concession, correct? Although the human brain hasn't been understood, so we can understand emergence. We're making a concession about emergence. Emergence ke बारे में clarity nahi hai. That's what it's saying. Yet you're saying, though this is true, most neurobiologists agree. So here is an agreement of neurobiologists that complex interconnections among the parts give rise to qualities that belong only to the whole. So neurobiologists are agreed on how the parts make up the whole, correct? So the connections that the single individual neurons hold, they make up the colony of the ants, likewise, right? They give rise to the whole understanding of the brain or how the brain functions, the brain functioning, basically. So my question is, why am I straight away saying most neurobiologists agree on this idea? Now look at three. Three says, nonetheless, that's a contrast indicator, contrasting word. What is it contrasting? Look at what it says. The sum of all neurons in the nervous system generate complex human emotions like fear and joy. So now it's saying what actually generates all that complex thoughts and complex emotions in the brain is the product of all the neurons in the brain, not a single neuron. Correct? So the first one said that one single neuron does not hold complex information. Correct? So it doesn't contain our emotions, etc. But the sum of all the neurons, the sum, yes, the whole is greater. The sum of all the neurons give rise to all such complex information. So do I see that 1, 3 can be a pair? Yes. Why is 1, 3 a pair? One is talking about one single emotion. A neuron doesn't contain the complex emotion. 3 is saying that all neurons put together, they create this complex thinking in the brain, complex emotions, etc. in the brain. 4 is what introduces emergent property of the brain. And you can see it's a very broad opening, a very general statement, right? So probably I want to consider 4 at the start. If I start with 4, particularly pay attention to the emergent property that it's referring to, right? It introduces some problems. We don't understand the brain enough. So we cannot understand how emergence functions, how it happens. Yet biologists, neurobiologists are agreed on this idea. The idea of the emergence is agreed with, right? People agree with it. I can only talk of the fact that this idea, which is so emergence, is this idea, this property. And though we don't have an much understanding of it, scientists agree with it. That idea can only be presented after I've defined or explained what emergence is, correct? So I start with 4, and then I define what this property is, and then speak of the agreement of neurobiologists, right? Fairly difficult one, particularly establishing a connection placement of 2. 2 is the problem here, correct? 2 is clearly the problem. And some of us might think that 2, 4 and 2 can be linked. That seems to be a very immediate link, because यहाँ पे भी emergence है, यहाँ पे भी emergence है. However, 1, 3 does not make sense after you say neurobiologists agree on this idea. What is the idea? The idea is explained in 1 and 3. So you have to bring in 1 and 3 first, and then talk about the agreement, right? Okay, let's look at 1 or 2 more questions. This should be an absolutely easy one. Okay, by the way, the previous question was taken from CAT 23 slot 2. All right, pretty recent one, but not an easy one. I wouldn't mark that as an easy one. Definitely moderate to tricky. Okay, now take a look at this. This is something that you're all going to get right. I mean, I would definitely expect all of you to get this right. It's a very easy one. Correct. Even looking at the pronouns, the article, right? All of this is going to help you. Come on, everyone. This shouldn't take you a lot of time. Okay. Now you surely don't want to start with one because it says it's a popular response, correct? What do you mean by a popular response? It's one popular response, okay? Response to something. It's a popular answer, one popular answer given to something, correct? And the response apparently is planting more trees. What is this the response to? Okay. It seems all but certain. So now this, it also might throw me a bit off track. I might wonder what is it connecting with? But there are sentences that you start with, it seems, it appears. They are not really, um, it seems, it appears, it looks like, etc. Right? They're just sentence structures. They're called sentence structure. They're parts of a sentence that just support or create a start. Right? Um, it is I who told you so, right? It was that question that troubled me a lot. You see, in all such sentences, it is, it ka relevance nahi hai. It's just a preparatory structure, support structure. It's not a pronoun. It's not referring to something. So when you say it seems all but certain, it's just a way in which you're constructing the sentence. Okay. So it seems all but certain that global warming will go well above 2 degrees. Okay. So we're talking of global warming is going to increase. Maybe that is what we are responding to. If global warming is going to increase, then maybe we are recommending, popular recommendation is that, exhortation or urging is that, plant more trees. Burning them releases it. Now I'm put off track again. What is them? What is it here? Which is why the scale of forest fires will actually increase carbon, correct? And it worsens global warming. So 3 kind of puts me off track. This is because trees sequester carbon by absorbing carbon dioxide. When you plant more trees, you have trees that will isolate carbon because they take in carbon dioxide, right? And when you burn those trees, the only plural noun that we are referring to here is trees, correct? When you burn these trees, those trees release carbon dioxide, release carbon, which is why the scale of a forest fire in the Amazon basin garnered headlines. Why does it make headlines? Because forest fires release a lot of carbon, right? And therefore it's dangerous. So clearly you start with 2, that's the broad idea. Then you talk of the response to deal with global warming. And then 4 explains how planting more trees actually helps bring down carbon emissions. And then 3 refers to, so if you burn these trees, this is like a standalone sentence. Sometimes it's not a classic dead sentence, you would say, because it is connected, the pronouns connect. So there is a concept called dead sentence in parajumbles, where you might find a sequence of 3 sentences being presented, right? Pakka 3 sentences. That sequence cannot be broken. And there is a sentence which kind of is referring to that context. Maybe it's a sentence that appeared in the previous paragraph or the later paragraph, etc. Okay. So it is referring to that discussion, but it's not an immediate connection. Okay. Now, where do you place such a sentence? You either place it at the start or at the end. Okay. Here it's not a classic dead sentence. I wish I had put together some past cat questions that have this classic dead sentence. But you will find that there are sometimes sentences that you don't know. They seem to refer to that whole topic, but are they extremely, is there great coherence between that sentence and the other 3 sentences? No. In such cases, you place the dead sentence in the safest spot. Keep the sequence as it is, but put the dead sentence either at the start or at the end, wherever it is more relevant. All right. So look at, where the connection is better and place it there. Right. This is not a classic dead sentence because you can see the pronouns actually connect. But then the topic is of the other sentences, 213, 214 are talking about uh, bringing down carbon emissions. And suddenly you find, here's a sentence that talking of worsening it, right? So 2143 it is. Okay. I think I'm going to stop here. I wanted to also discuss one 5-sentence parajumble, but I didn't realize it's already more than an hour, right? I suppose we lost some time at the start. Do you want us to quickly take up one 6-sentence parajumble, or should we stop now? Do you remember this concept, by the way? It might be, you might come across weird sentences. I often see students talking about, acha, ye sequence to theek hai, but how does this sentence fit in there? No, that's just a sentence taken from somewhere else. It is not coherently connected to the rest of the sentences. So you place it in the safest place possible, right? Either at the start and or at the end. Okay, quickly, right, without wasting too much time, I'm going to take you to one of the 5 sentence questions. Okay, I think this one. Huh. Okay. CAT 2017. After that, we did not have 5 sentence parajumbles. Very time consuming it tends to be. Have you at least found some pairs? Okay. Okay. Right. So when you read the first sentence, you figure that it is talking about the implications of something, correct? It has implications, or it impacts, it influences, it has consequences in the healthcare system, etc. Particularly because we have very few doctors, very few hospital infrastructure, etc. Right? So something seems to have a lot of result or a lot of consequences for the healthcare system. Okay. What is that? This? It might be the placebo effect. Sentence 2 has to be understood correctly. It talks of the placebo effect where a patient shows signs of improvement because he's been given some fake medication. Does he know that it's a fake medication? No. Right? He's made to believe that he's being given the real medicine, real medication or so. But he's made to believe that. So in his mind, he thinks that he's being given the medication, but this is just a fake thing. Nothing given, maybe some sugar tablets or something like that, right? But he's under the impression that, okay, I'm being treated. That's called the placebo effect. So what is it that's working? Apparently, what's working is his belief that this drug is working on him, correct? It's his mind that's making him heal, correct? So that the mind has the power to trigger changes because the individual believes is this idea, is the placebo effect, okay? But you see, 3 is saying that it is not solely based on believing in treatment because the setting is also important. It is not just about belief. It is how you deal with the patient, how you make him feel comfortable, how you give him that feeling of, all of this is real, etc. Right? Many things. The other aspects also matter. So you can see that 4-3 should be a pair, correct? Because one is saying that things work because the individual believes. But that's not only because he believes, his mind believes, because the other things are also important, correct? So 4-3 is a pair. 4-3 is talking of what is given into the placebo effect, right? Now, 1 I know should come at the end because it's talking about this idea that you can make people heal themselves by just making their minds believe they are being treated. So they're actually self-healing. It has implications for the healthcare system, especially where there are very few resources, where the system is depleted, there are not sufficient doctors, etc. So it has great implications or effects, consequences for a weak healthcare system that we have. Now, where do you place 5? What is 5 saying? Now, placebo effects are being studied as a potential portal into the self-healing powers of the body. They are currently being studied. So you have a definition. You define what the placebo effect is. And then you are saying that, look, we are studying this currently for how it can be used to self-heal an individual, right? And that is the self-healing power is what is explained in 4. Of course, placebo effect is just defined here as a fake intervention. But the fact that the mind is healing the body, it is a self-healing process, only comes in 5 and further explained in 4. Correct? So 5, placebo effect is being studied for the self-healing powers of the body. Self-healing is explained further in 4. What is this self-healing? The individual believes that, things are going good for me. I'm healing, etc. And therefore, he actually heals. But then the next sentence says it's not just about belief. There are other aspects also that are important, correct? Placement of 5 is a critical one. I think you can see that 4-3 link, 4-3 link. You can also see 2 defines, introduces the whole topic. So it should start, right? Placing 5 is the problem here. All right. But I hope that is understood. 5-4-3 happen to be one thought process. All right, guys. So I'll have to stop here. I hope all this discussion gave you some insights. Remember that you have to read sentences carefully, okay? Recognize that sentences can have, they are not very typical classic paragraphs. There might be trickiness brought in, etc. And therefore, I look at, very logical ways in which I can connect sentences, all of these clues like a noun, pronoun link, transitional words, etc. I create those mandatory pairs where those visible links are not there particularly, where, noun, pronoun, link, etc. is not there, but the content links are there, correct? Idea being elaborated, idea being contrasted, etc. Sometimes there can be those transitional words too. Try and figure out a starter. Of the set of sentences, the most general, the most broad statement is always your starter, correct? Once you get that starter, remember, then it is rather smooth sailing, because maybe you've got a starter and then maybe you recognize a pair, correct? Or a mandatory pair. Then you know that you only have to place one sentence, right? So, okay, I'm going to stop the lecture now. I hope all of this was useful. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for participating. Okay. Yes. Do like. If you liked the discussion, do like. If you have further suggestions to give, please do share. All right. Yes. Thank you everyone. Bye-bye.